Hello, ladies and gentlemen, this is Blue Maxima, and I'm going to chat to you a bit about PlayStation VR. And the footage in the background is of the menu of VR Worlds loading and me just fiddling around in that, because I'm not sure what other footage I can put in there, but we will get to that. But first off, I need to apologize for certain kinds of quality for my PlayStation VR footage. Mainly because my Elgato capture device has an absolute fit every time the quote-unquote scene changes in VR games, whether it be after like a loading screen or swapping to one of the demos on the PlayStation demo discs. So it is kind of hit and miss which footage I decide to use here. I use mainly one big block of footage I managed to get with my Elgato. Then I had to resort to using the PlayStation 4's share footage as a backup for the demo discs. But, you know, it's there, just warning you now though, it is VR footage, so if you're going to be watching the background too intently, don't. Motion sickness while you're watching VR footage is definitely a thing. I know this for a fact because I experienced it myself. But anyway, I'm going to talk to you about PlayStation VR. So, personally, I never was a big person who was into VR before the PlayStation VR, or at least my PlayStation VR came along, because I always thought it was a bit of a fad. I was on the side of people who thought, this can't be as good as it looks. And to be fair, I was kind of fair of thinking that, mainly because VR is really one of those things, and I acknowledged this even back then, VR is really one of those things where you have to experience it in order to really get what it's all about. So I actually ended up getting a PlayStation VR very recently, in fact. It was about a week ago at this point. Yeah, it'd be a week ago because I got it on a... No, actually, it wouldn't even be a week ago. It'd be like 4 days. This recording might be a little bit off on the dates, but yeah, nevertheless, I did get it about 3 to 4 to a week ago, something like that. And I've mainly been using it to get used to it. I've been getting my quote-unquote sea legs, as it's called, and I've been, making sure my setup works and trying out all the demos and stuff that they've got going on in the store. And I'm going to tell you about basically everything I've done up to this point, and this is more or less going to serve as a quote-unquote review for the hardware and also PlayStation VR Worlds, because that is the one game that... Actually, that's not fair. I've played 2 games. One's Doom and one's VR Worlds. And I'm going to talk about VR Worlds and show you some footage from it in this video right here. So I'm going to go through the setup of PlayStation VR real quick, because I know people like me being in-depth about everything that's in a game, so talking about the hardware shouldn't be too hard either. So what you get in the box is actually pretty simple in the grand scheme of things. You get a headset, which I have a few pictures of on screen right now, right next to a PlayStation Vita, so that you can compare them to them. And the headset is actually a little bit smaller than I expected it to be, but it's still pretty big, and it's definitely bulky off the front. But we will talk about the headset, and the headset is actually really easy to use. Now, it takes a little bit to learn how. It's a couple of steps. You got to use the button on the front to push the screen forward. Then you got to use the button on the back to stretch out the strap behind you, stick it on, push the view in with the button on the bottom, and then you got to just tweak it until it's just right and the screen's not bending and the text is nice and clear. It's something you get used to really quickly, I promise you that much. But it is indeed easy to use once you get used to it, and it's actually pretty easy to help with other people as well when, you want to show it off to them. There are a couple of other things in there that are worth talking about as well, like the clamp on the back. You have a little knob on the back that you use to tighten it and use it to try and push in so that all the light shields around the outside don't let light in, because if you let light in, it'll reflect off the lens and it'll create a pretty bad image. So you do need to worry about that. And the funny thing is, my head is actually really weirdly shaped. I've got a big bump coming out of the back of my head, which is like the back of my skull. I know that sounds a bit weird, but it's there, and it's kind of annoying to deal with, because it's kind of hard for me to not have like a little gap running down the bridge of my nose, just because of the shape of my head and where the back of the headset has to go. But I've given this headset to both my mother and father who don't have this problem, and they haven't had a problem with it in the slightest. So yeah, it's just me on that one. The headset is also extremely light. I mean, it's still there and you'll still be able to feel it, but once you've been playing for a couple of minutes, it practically just disappears off your head. It's like it's not there at all. It's more painful standing up for however long you want to play the VR for than actually like having the headset on your head. It is really light and really nice. And the cords coming off it are also useful as well, because you've got this one cord that comes out of the back of it. Now, there are actually 2 generations of VR. I think I've got the second PlayStation VR, I mean. I think I've got the second generation model, which integrated one of the cables in to the cord that plugs, the 2 cords that plug into everything. And for me, it was actually pretty simple. It's just one long cord with 2 braids on it. Well, just 2 regular cords that are braided together on it, going down and plugging into a little box on the floor that then goes up to the processor box on my desk. And here's a picture of that. So there's the processor box, which you need to plug into the PlayStation, and they give you this absolutely huge manual and like numbered pieces so that you know exactly what goes where, which is actually a really nice thing to do because it actually made it relatively easy to set up. I did get turned around at one point, but that was because I was losing a couple of components here and there. You do also need the camera, which by default doesn't actually come in the box. So you do actually need to go and buy this separately. And I got it in a bundle, and you can go and get this in a bundle with certain PSVRs if you want to, but if you're just buying the headset by itself, be aware you do need the camera. There's only one thing you can do on the headset, which is actually kind of neat, but we'll get onto that shortly. And other than that, you need the camera in order to get the VR functionality working, so don't even think about doing it. You do it without a camera. You also get headphones. Crappy Sony quality headphones that you could probably just throw away. I have a pair of old Audio-Technica over-ears that I put on every time I play VR, miles ahead of the ones they include in the bag. So make sure you get a good pair of over-ear headphones because they will do you much better. Or at the very least, get a pair of buds that aren't crappy $5 ones that Apple chucks in their box. You will also, of course, need a PlayStation 4. I actually have a PlayStation 4 Pro, and the PlayStation 4 Pro has certain advantages over the original PS4, including in VR stuff. There are some games that will make the corners of certain screens blurry if you are playing certain games. It doesn't do that on some games with the PS4 Pro, and there are, of course, some little graphical effects and stuff that are also activated once you've got the VR technology, once you've got the Pro technology plugged in, which is really nice that it is actually able to do that. And yeah, I actually upgraded my PS4 to a PS4 Pro recently, so yeah, you can understand why I went for the Pro model and then decided, you know what, I might as well get a PSVR too. So I actually got the whole bundle of stuff really cheap. It came in at about 369 Australian dollars because our local alternative to GameStop, which is EB Games, it's not an alternative, it's the same thing under a different name, that they had it available for that price, and it came with the camera, the headset obviously, and Skyrim VR, which I haven't actually played at the time of this recording, and PlayStation VR Worlds. Now, that is actually a interesting combination of games, I've got to say, because one is definitely more suited to people who have not played VR before, and one is suited to people who have definitely played VR before and should probably have a bit of experience before they go popping that in. So, yeah, a little bit weird, but whatever. For me, it was a good price. Apparently, even the Americans didn't get the PSVR that cheap on their Black Friday sales, which is actually kind of silly. So, what's out there right now? What is there on the PSVR that made me decide to pick it up? Well, I ended up looking, and it turns out there is actually a fair bit. The PlayStation VR recently passed the 100 games landmark on the PlayStation Store, which is actually kind of impressive. There's a fair few types of games out there, and, well, you might be thinking, well, how does that help if I can't actually experience it myself? There's looking at gameplay trailers, and then there's looking at gameplay trailers for VR, which actually makes you sick. Now, the nice thing about the PlayStation VR Marketplace is that it has an absolute ton of demos. the amount of demos that you can get for the PSVR is absolutely ridiculous. You can get 2 demo discs, and they don't actually mention this in the box. You do get a demo disc with a PSVR headset that has like 8 games on it. But you can go and download 2 demo discs from the PlayStation Store that all up have about 30 unique demos on them. And sure, they only go for a couple of minutes each, but at the same time, they go for a couple of minutes each. You'll have a couple of hours of stuff worth to do as soon as you take the damn thing out of the box if you download the demo discs ahead of time. And not to mention there's a bunch of standalone demos as well, and free-to-play VR experiences, I use that quote very finger quotey, like my fingers should be the size of the bloody Empire State Building, but yes, experiences. So there is actually a lot of stuff to do out there right now, and as I said before, I have only played PlayStation VR Worlds, the demo discs, and Doom VFR, and I'm going to talk about them right now. But the first thing I want to do is talk about just the overall tech itself and how it all works, and just in a general, like, how well does it work as a thing. And, well, let's get into that, shall we? So I've got a few things here in this little miniature script I've done up here, which has all my list of points on it. Submersion into the world via the technology. That sounds like the most generic way to say that sentence ever, but, you know, if you ever need, like, a really generic review, ask me to do it. I can actually probably get it done. But let's talk about the just overall VR experience via the technology. Now, it is a lot better than I was expecting. You put the headset on, and you don't expect to see anything in front of your face except like a flat screen, right? Now, that's actually kind of wrong. It's this weird not even a fisheye effect. It's like this weird big circle in front of your eyes that that you're basically just looking at a screen, right? And it just looks a little bit weird once you start it up, because there's things on the left and right. It's kind of like wearing a pair of those goggles you wear down to the pool, right? You know, those translucent, transparent, however you want to say, goggles, where you put them on, and just around the sides, you can see the blurriness of the plastic that they didn't think you could see through properly. Yeah, it's basically like wearing a pair of those, except the outsides are black. That's more or less the sort of thing you're working with here, except, and, you know, it's a big circle. It's not 2 separate eye holes. It's a big circle with one screen that you're looking at, but it renders the 2 eyes differently down the middle. So it looks like you're looking at 2 different screens, just really thin ones, which is a nice little trick on saving on processing power, I gotta say. But yeah, the actual effect of, like, 3 dimensions in the world is actually surprisingly pronounced. Now, I'm not someone who can actually see 3D in, like, 3D movies. Like, I've put on the actual proper 3D glasses and not the blue and red 3D that pops out in front of your face that they used to have years ago before they brought in the quote-unquote proper 3D. But I can't see 3D. I can actually get the sense of depth from the PlayStation VR, though. It does create a real sense of depth. When you see me playing in the main menu of, like, PlayStation VR Worlds, for example, you can see that I can actually see the bullets as they are closer and further away from me. And you can actually get a little bit of depth perception going on with just how far the bullet is away from you and just how close it is towards you. And it is a really neat effect, and it actually works pretty damn well. Big things that suddenly come at you at your vision do appear to, quote-unquote, jump out at you if you're given enough time to look at them. There are some games that don't do it smoothly enough, like Doom VFR, for example, to make it look like that, but the kitchen demo on the first demo disc is actually really good for this. It really looks like those damn things are coming straight at you. And it is horrifying sometimes. I showed the infamous Ocean Descent to my mother, and when the shark came and started biting on the cage, she freaked the hell out. So it obviously works. It works surprisingly well, which is actually kind of surprising. And there is a couple of things that are worth noting about this technology as well. So the way the headset works is that it actually has a giant pair of lights on there's like 5 lights on the front, and then there's a big pair of lights on the back. And they're of different shapes, so the headset can actually tell whether or not you're facing to the left, to the right, or behind you, because you've always got lights going, which means that a 360-degree turning arc actually works with, like, light-based technology. I'm amazed they got it to work as well as they did. The downside to this, though, for the most part anyway, is that mostly you can't do room-scale VR with this sort of technology because the camera is required, obviously, in order to make the VR work properly because it needs to detect the lights on the front and the back of the thing. So you can only get within a certain radius away from the camera, otherwise it won't be able to see you. In comparison to other VR solutions, like I believe the Oculus Rift and the HTC Vive, they both have other different processes for detecting your position and your rotation. But yeah, that's how the VR does it, the PSVR does it. And it's actually still pretty good. I mean, it kind of limits you to stand-only VR. There's no such thing as room scale with this tech because you can't move too far out of position. But what's there works really damn well. And we'll get onto how the repositioning stuff works shortly because I do have a bunch of things to say about that. And we're actually going to get onto that right now because my next section is on controls. Now, I did actually pick up a couple of the PlayStation sodomizers, as I've come to calling them, because they really do look like something some poor guy would get put up his bum by one of those grey aliens. They are silly. They are giant balls of light on the end of giant sticks, and it looks ridiculous. But at the same time, they actually work pretty well. You can get a pretty damn good idea of where everything is just by looking down at your hands half the time, and you'll be able to see the damn controllers going about in your hands down there, which is actually really, really nice. And I am quite a fan of using them. They have a fair few buttons, but not many. The one big problem I have is that it doesn't have analog sticks. And without analog sticks, you can't do full 360-degree movement. And it kind of brings into question one of the major limitations of this technology, which is if you turn around, the lights get blocked and you won't be able to use your arms properly. Now, a bunch of games have things that will help you with this, including Doom VFR, and I assume Skyrim will have that sort of tech as well. I haven't actually played it yet, but trust me, I will get around to it. So, you do have that problem where you can't be looking behind you. You can't do full 360-degree like looking around. You do need to have some kind of button combination to help you out in that respect for the PSVR. And most of the games that I've played so far that actually need to make use of this do pretty damn well with it. So I'm not going to say that it's completely implausible. I'm just saying it's something that's worth noting because more hardcore gamers that aren't going to be able to get used to the idea of facing forward most of the time probably aren't going to like this. And there is also, of course, the DualShock 4, which can only be used in some games, but then again, moves can only be used in some games, and then you end up only using the headset in some games, and it's really annoying because a lot of these damn things are just made up so that you can't see what controllers you'll need until you actually boot into the damn game, so you might end up having to put down the DualShock 4 and pick up the moves while you still have the headset on. You can't see the damn things, so it's actually kind of unpleasant like that. You do also have the option of standing and sitting, but some games require you to sit, some require you to stand, and again, the games don't really warn you about this. You just kind of need to know in advance what you need to do. And sometimes, it's absolutely fine to play standing games that need to be played while sitting down while you're standing up, but with that said, bit of a pain in the ass because you just need to get in the mindset of playing a sit-down game while you're standing up. The footage I've got of Drive Club VR actually has me playing it while I'm standing up because I couldn't be bothered to get the chair to sit down. So, yeah, that's a little bit of an issue, not a massive one. The other thing I need to note is that you really do need a pretty open space to make this all work. Like, I have, the absolute bare minimum that I would recommend for playing PlayStation VR with the moves, because it is entirely possible to run into things while you're playing with the damn things without even realizing it. I almost sent my poor PlayStation 2 flying off the side of a bookcase, so you do need to be relatively careful about how you handle your play space. Try and get something that, if you can't extend your arms out completely and then bring them down to your sides without hitting something along the way, your play space isn't wide enough. Get a wider play space. That is my big recommendation. And then, do like a 90-degree turn, arms out, bring them down, and if you can't do that, find a bigger play space. That is the big issue that you need to worry about with that. But the actual controls, no matter what you use, seem to work absolutely fine. Whether it be driving your car in Drive Club or holding a gun in either hand to shoot robots with and raw data, it works mostly as you would expect, minus the caveats I've talked about, which is, well, considering that it's meant to be a cheapo technology meant for the masses, it's actually pretty impressive. And speaking of meant for the masses, let's talk about the graphical fidelity. Now, the quality of the screen they've got inside the PlayStation VR actually looks really nice. Everything looks nice and bright, everything more or less stands out, although chances are there are some games that are going to be lower resolution and thus lower quality because the game is actually... Some of the games are actually quite pixelated in the screen, and you'll see my footage of raw data later on, because I have some of it because of the demo discs. But the screen fidelity itself is actually really nice. However, there is a screen door effect. Now, the screen door effect is a pretty easy phenomenon to understand. Imagine that you're standing in front of a door that's made up of a grid. There are some doors that are actually made up of this, and that's why they're called screen doors. But just imagine that you're standing right in front of a surface that looks like a very small grid is on the wall, but it's almost completely transparent, but you can just barely see the edges of the individual pixels. That is something that you can see in PlayStation VR, but the effect is actually really tiny. I've seen what screens that have worse, pixel messes in comparison to the PlayStation VR. It's very easy to ignore, and it goes away just after a couple of minutes of looking past it. It's literally like looking past it to see the game through a bloody mosquito net window. It actually works really well once you get used to it. The details of the field of view, it's about 100 degrees, as I've looked up. And 100 degrees is kind of hard to describe, but at the same time, as someone who plays a lot of PC games where you can actually adjust the FOV, I usually play my PC games about 100 FOV anyway, and that's about what they look like in the PlayStation VR. So the field of view is definitely wide enough. I'll give it that. If it was any thinner, I'd be kind of against it, but 100 as a default works absolutely fine, and it doesn't feel like that you're being restricted in any way. As I said before, there are black edges around the side that you can see, but if you're actually focusing on the game in front of you, you'll eventually start to not notice those. So, just FYI, that's how it works. There is also a couple of other things the headset can do, which is actually kind of neat. The first thing it does is, even when you're not playing a VR game, it actually mirrors your PlayStation 4's regular screen on a big black void. There's just this one huge PlayStation 4 screen, and everything else is blackness, and you can hold the options button to readjust its position. So if you want to go sit down in your chair away from the camera and then hold the options button, it'll reset the screen to in front of you so you can sit back and play the damn thing like it's a bloody screen all of its own, or that you're playing in a gigantic theater that's pitch black. It's a really neat little feature, and I'm hoping to make some use out of it, because it's actually would be a pretty cool way to play games, even though the default resolution would obviously be worse than your typical 1080p screen, or even 4K at this point, because I know the PS4 can do some native 4K or post above 1080p images. The whole thing is a neat little feature, and it's nice that it's there. It actually works on other things as well, but I'm not going to go to the effort to unplugging all the cords and trying to figure out how to get to plug into something like my PC. You can also apparently use it on your PC to play games that require a mouse and keyboard, which is actually another nice feature, but again, I'd have to go to the effort of setting up in my PC, and I really can't be bothered to do that. There is also the social aspect, which actually comes from it, because whenever you are playing a game, the screen that you normally display the PlayStation 4 on will display what they call a social screen, which is actually just a picture of your VR. It displays the top 3/4 of the image that you're seeing in the VR headset, which is a little weird because, say you're playing Doom VR, for example, and you're holding your guns in front of you, you can't actually see the guns. You can only see people, the bullets that are coming out of the guns. It's a bit odd, but it's there and it works. And you can actually go and play some VR games and have some people on the seat next to you. So I believe some VR games actually support popping open a tablet and trying them out, which is actually also a really neat feature. And, you know, you also look like an absolute dickhead when you're using it with two sodomizers, one in each hand, and this big headset on that just has these big glowy blue lights. It looks retarded, but at the same time, if you've got the headset on and the headphones on, you can't hear a damn thing, you can't see a damn thing. So it's basically like there's no one else even there, which is why I laughed really hard when my father was playing PSVR Worlds in the London heist, where he went to put his hand down on the flippin' desk and almost fell right through it. It can really make you look like an idiot, and it's worth a laugh or two, I'll tell you that much, especially if you can get someone to play Ocean Descent while they don't know if there's a shark in the first dive, because spoiler alert, there's a shark. And now that was a pretty good segue, wasn't it? So let's segue over into PSVR Worlds, which is the game I'm going to talk about here. Now, you might be wondering why I'm picking PSVR Worlds to talk about. Well, I think this should have been the bundle game now and forever. This should literally just be the thing. Instead of including a demo disc, they should have just included PSVR Worlds right out of the box and then included like demos on the internet. So anyway, PSVR Worlds. PSVR Worlds is a selection of 5 quote-unquote experiences, and they slowly get more complex and more action-filled the further in you go, which makes it a really nice introductory package for the PlayStation VR, because it means that you can get your headset on, move it in, and play the games in order to get your bearings, because some people will actually get a fair amount of motion sickness while playing the PlayStation VR. And it is worth noting that slowly edging people into the more complicated stuff will work way better than just dropping them straight into Doom VFR. I helped my father do that, and he is actually going along quite well. And I did the same thing, and except for a couple of games, which I'm not going to mention until we get to the demo discs portion, I didn't feel motion sickness at all while I was playing the PSVR Worlds and slowly working my way up. And while I am kind of, like, I'm obviously a little bit of an expert because I've been playing games my entire bloody life, so, you know, I don't get motion sick anywhere near as easily as the regular sort of person. At the same time, it is entirely possible that you might. So I'm just saying as a warning, get in nice and slowly. And the best way to get in nice and slowly is to start with the first game on PSVR Worlds, which is the Ocean Descent. The Ocean Descent is a stand still and enjoy the view thing. There's no gameplay in it whatsoever. You just slowly go down into the water, look around at things, and come back up. It's nothing really particularly complex. It's just a enjoy the view sort of thing. In fact, that's literally what the game encourages you to do. Enjoy the view. So you end up slowly going down, looking at all these lovely little creatures, running into a couple of sharks and all that. You can look around all 360 degrees, and it looks really lovely. They've done a fantastic job with making all the sea creatures look believable, while also not going too overboard on the graphical detail and making it look unrealistic. So they did a fantastic job with that. There are 3 different dives you can go on, and they're all a few minutes each, so you won't spend too much time playing this or any other game in the collection for that matter. But what you will spend playing it is a great introduction, especially if you can convince people to try your VR. Put on the VR headset and let them go into Shark Descent, and make sure they don't fall over when the shark attacks them in the cage, and it will be the best introduction to how the technology works. My mother was absolutely fascinated with it. She was constantly pointing at animals as she was going down into the depths and going, oh, there's a crab, oh, there's a thing, oh, there's a shark, isn't there, you bastards? You didn't tell me about the shark. But anyway, the Ocean Descent is really nice. It's a good addition to this package. The second game in the package is something I actually can't remember the name of specifically, so I'm just going to call it Headball. And the idea of Headball is actually really simple. You don't use any physical controls for this one either. You use the VR headset. The game is very good at tracking exactly where the headset is, so you use the headset to play a game of VR Pong, which is actually something that's surprisingly surprisingly popular in this technology. So you use it to move the bat back and forth, and you can do motions with your head to spin the ball and do power hits, which is actually a really neat way of using the technology. And the combination of the fancy graphical style and some kick-ass music actually make it really good as well if you're just learning to, use your head inside this technological space. Works really nicely. And then there's the London Heist. The London Heist is the most interesting game on the package. Basically presented as like an hour-long made-for-TV movie that you play in VR. It pops you into a gangster's world where you're getting talked to by people to do a specific job. Then you get into a couple of gunfights. Now, there's only a couple of actual gunfights in the full game, other than, say, a couple of, little challenges you can play along the outside. But other than that, it's basically just, one movie that you sit through. The thing about it is that it's actually also a really good way to demonstrate the moves, because you can use the moves to solve a couple of simple puzzles, pick up a gun, and fiddle around with things in the world, and then you use it to load your gun and actually aim and shoot your gun. Or your mini Uzi in one of the other segments. But it actually works really well as a concept, and it makes a good introduction into using the moves in VR, because it makes it so that you get used to the idea of picking things up in VR and putting them down and using them to shoot at people. And it's also got this neat little story going on, which is really thin on the ground, I will admit, but it just makes for a nice overall experience, and I actually do appreciate it for what it is. The other two games that we have in the package aren't as good, unfortunately. We have VR Luge, which is another one of the head-controlled games, where you tilt the view of your head, you tilt your headset left to right, and you use it to avoid cars and make your way down this hill as fast as possible. I've got two problems with it. One, the steering is a bit off, and it doesn't feel very easy to be precise with it at all, and it makes it a bit of a pain in the ass to work with. And two, it's lying down VR instead of standing or sitting. So you end up in this weird position where you feel a bit out of touch with the actual game, and you just end up ever so, just out of sync with everything because of the weird toning, and it just doesn't feel right. And I wouldn't recommend playing it, honestly, just because it doesn't do a very good job of showing off the technology after all. You know what would have done a better job of it, though? Same concept, same graphics, same everything. Instead of it being a luge, though, you make it a kid's go-kart race with wooden carts and do that instead, so you can play it while you're sitting down. That would work 100 times better. And I'm not entirely sure why they didn't go for that instead of VR Luge, but there you go. The final game on the disc is Scavenger's Odyssey, and Scavenger's Odyssey is a sort of mech shooty style thing with a couple bits of jumping and aiming looking at the, certain things on the screen and stuff like that. The only problem with it, well, there are actually a couple of problems with it. One problem, quite short. No surprise there. Problem number two, kind of hard to enjoy the shooty gameplay of it. The whole being in the mech thing works pretty well, but the actual shooting and the picking things up and throwing it isn't as precise as it really wants to be. It automatically locks onto everything, so you don't really feel like you're in that much control. And while it's okay for a few minutes, it gets pretty dull after a while. And I do think that doing a sort of Riggs style thing, where you control the mech in that game instead and sticking that on the disc instead, would have worked better. There is also a story going on in the background, but considering that the game barely lasts a certain amount of time, it doesn't really work either. So yeah, Ocean Descent, Headball, and the London Heist is a great set of three slowly getting more complicated games to start out with on the VR. The other two can go without, and you can replace them with some of the things on the demo discs. Now, nothing on the packaging of the PSVR or the marketing materials or anything like that will let you know these exist. I remember back when these first came out that it might have actually gone away after a little while, so I thought to myself, oh, I'll get the first demo disc when I can get it as soon as I can, right? So that I don't lose access to it if I ever get a PSVR 2 or 3 years from now. It turns out it took me less than a year. Then they released a second disc with a bunch of familiar demos and then a bunch of newer demos. So there's 2 discs out there. You can go download them both right now off the PlayStation Store, and they are both absolutely free. Now, there's a couple of faults with these demo discs. One, the load times are ridiculous. It takes anywhere between 30 seconds to a minute to load into the damn things when you either A, start it from the main menu, or B, you exit a demo and go back to that menu. B, they have packed in some weird non-demos. Like, they've packed in a couple of, 3D video experiences, which seem entirely unnecessary because you can download them for free from the PlayStation Store anyway. And they've put in a couple of entries for games that don't actually have demos included on the disc, but are downloaded from the PlayStation Store. And in the case of Hustle Kings VR, they didn't actually include a demo for that. It's literally just a button to buy it, and there's no demo for it at all, which is ridiculous because I would have liked to have actually seen how pool tables would work in VR, because that sounds like the best thing ever. And oh well, I guess if I end up picking up a game for that, it'll be Sports Bar VR. But anyway, those are the negatives. I would also call it a negative that the game, the thing actually just cuts out my Elgato capture device, so I wasn't able to get you good footage of the demo discs. But I am playing some footage in the background on repeat for you, just so you're not sitting there looking at anything. But here's, looking at nothing, I should say. But here's the positives about the demo discs. As I said earlier on in this little rant that I've got going on here, it is surprisingly jam-packed with content. Even if you go outside the store as well, because there's an absolute ton of demos outside the store. There's 50 demos of games that you can play in the discs and on the store overall. So I was able to play everything from Drive Club to Raw Data on these demo discs. And thanks to these demo discs, I added somewhere between 10 to 15 games to the stuff that I wanted to buy list. And it wasn't just stuff I was already interested in, like Drive Club VR, which I was very interested in for the fact that I actually like Drive Club in the first place, and, being in a car seat would be absolutely fantastic, just because, being in a car seat and actually driving a car sounds pretty cool when you can't actually run over a few people. But there are some games on the demo disc that I wasn't expecting to like that I actually did, like Job Simulator. I thought it was going to be a little bit too tongue-in-cheek for me, but after having played the demo, I'm convinced that it's just the right balance. Then there's games like Raw Data, which I wouldn't have been able to see how cool it was otherwise, being able to dual-wield guns and trying out its movement system, which is actually better than pretty much every other shooter of this kind that I've played. There's Moss, which I never would have suspected would have been good, but it's another one of those games where you look down on the world and you go and you jump it and use slight combat and puzzle solving skills. And there's Tumble VR, which I did pick up because PlayStation sent me $10 for free for some reason, so I used it to buy Tumble VR, which is literally just build a tower of blocks, Jenga style, until it all falls down. And it just goes on and on and on. So you have an absolute ton of stuff to do with the PSVR as soon as you take it out of the box when you get the demo discs downloaded. So, I mean, that is a really good thing. It is, I cannot even tell you how good of a thing it is that we're going back to demo disc culture, just because we need the damn demos in order to actually get an idea of how half this shit works, and letting me try out all the individual little causes and stuff as it's, all the individual little genres and stuff they got going on in the demos and stuff like that. It's just, yeah, awesome. Really like it. Really impressed that they want to keep doing this, and I hope that they keep pushing for new demo discs and stuff every few months. I mean, I know it took a year for the second demo disc to come out, but they could really do with releasing some more demos as time goes on, because, there are some games that we're just going to need to play to be convinced by. So yeah. Now, that's pretty much the end of the rant. It's been about 40 minutes, so I hope you've been enjoying that. I definitely don't have enough footage to superimpose over the top of this little rant here, so I hope you enjoyed the extra ton of trailers and stuff that I probably had to go and download for this video. But I think that the PlayStation VR is currently in a pretty good spot. After having played it for a while and being impressed with just how well the technology works, how fun it is to control games just in the whole first-person perspective, where you're doing everything from driving cars to shooting robots. And when you're doing all of those neat little things and it all just works, well, almost as well as I would hope, it is a surprisingly good showing. And with the library being as big as it is, and with the amount of free stuff there is to do to convince you to go and buy all of this stuff that's out there, I am very impressed with the technology, and I hope that it continues to grow in a reasonable way. So, I have a bunch of other videos to do. I am going to be recording as much footage of these games as I possibly can, so that I can be doing videos for you guys, because I do think that this is I'm not going to say it's a market, because that was the first word that came to mind, but I'm not going to be using that word. What I'm going to be saying is, I think it's something that's worth talking about, because the whole set of gameplay that's going on here, and just the whole set of new ideas that comes about having a new perspective and new ways to control the games, makes this a really interesting part of the industry to be in. And, well, considering that I was kind of convinced that VR was a fad and it was going to fade out within a year or two after things like the Oculus Rift and HTC Vive came out, let's just say I was pleasantly surprised. Why did I buy the PSVR again to begin with if I didn't think VR was going to be anything less than a fad? I don't know, but now that I've bought it, that means that Sony's probably just going to chuck it all out. Because that's what they did with the Vita, isn't that right? So yeah, I'm going to go and start playing my actual VR games now, mainly because I've only been playing the bloody demos for the last few days. And I'm going to start with, well, considering that I've almost finished it, it's the only game that I've played outside of VR Worlds. Considering that I've almost finished it, it's probably going to be the game that gets a video first. But the first game that I'm going to be doing a video on is Doom VFR. So keep your eyes open for that one sometime whenever after this video goes up. So this has been Blue Maxima, and I will see you all next time.